you saved by grace or by faith? What's the difference? St. Paul Lutheran Church is who we are, sp815.org. We're confessors of the unaltered Augsburg Confession, UAC. That makes us Lutherans. We are part of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, LCMS. We are pro-grace, pro-Bible, pro-marriage, pro-family, and pro-life. We are a congregation of Proverbs contemplating, Psalms praying, Jesus quoting Protestant Christians. He is risen. He is risen indeed. Alleluia. Are you saved by grace or by faith is my introduction to this set-apart Sunday in the set-apart series teaching on our riddle, which is this picture and is also Proverbs 1:2a. That should be how the riddle opens up for you. That is, in Hebrew, lada'at kakma umusar, which you now know means to know wisdom and discipline. And over the next few weeks, along with the texts that are there for preaching, we're going to be talking about knowing wisdom and discipline and using this picture or riddle, I hope, to kind of open up the beauty of Solomon's wisdom to you in how he makes distinctions. That is, he understands as much as he does by knowing that this is not that. And once you know this is not that, then you can use this the way you're supposed to and that the way you're supposed to. And the whole book's about this, but it's really there in just these first three words. Because, again, if you're like me, the first, 17 times you read the book, you went right past it. To know wisdom and discipline. Sounds good. I'm up for that. Jesus, teach me that. Okay, here we go. Keep going. What's next? Give me more. That doesn't seem like much to me. Right. It took me a long time to realize I needed to slow down and just look at those three words because I didn't know the difference between, at the time in English, wisdom and instruction. What's the difference between wisdom and instruction? It sounds to me like if I instruct someone, wisdom's what I'm trying to give them, right? Like what's the difference? And then I thought, well, what's the Hebrew say? Instruction's really not the best translation. If you want to know what it's getting at, if you want to know the difference between wisdom and something, musar, it's discipline. And we'll get to that in week 3 here. Yeah? But notice then, wisdom is not discipline. And if you're going to know any of this, then it can't be knowledge either. So right there with 3 words, you have 3 categories or 3 different ways of thinking about thinking, actually. What you might call an ontology, you might call it a philosophy. It's a lot of things. It's so deep. I want to talk about it forever. I also believe that just exposing you to it makes you smarter. It's like, you can't help it. I just made you smarter. You're like, I didn't understand it, Pastor. I'm like, yep, that's right. That's why you're smarter now. That's how it works. Your brain got expanded. You're like, I never thought of that before. I have to think on that a little bit. Yeah, that's how wisdom gets put into you through exposure to knowledge. All right. I'm going to move on a little bit here, but I'm going to tie our first word to know, knowledge, in, and make that what we're learning about today, right? So we're going to learn about knowledge, wisdom, and discipline as 3 different ideas over the next 3 weeks, using this picture to remember them all and tie them into a nice little package. And in that way, today, knowledge is the focal point. And I'm going to suggest to you that, well, first, I didn't do this yet for you. First, put them where you think they go in your own head. Is the blue plus knowledge or wisdom or discipline? Is the heart knowledge or wisdom or discipline? Which one is it? Because it's such a beautiful truth. You can actually spin this Ferris wheel here and it'll work. You can make it work. But I'm going to teach it a certain way for the sake of the teaching. So I'm going to open the riddle up here and say that the knowledge is the plus. And I'll explain it this way. When you receive knowledge, you receive something additional. It's from outside and now you have it. You have a gain that has occurred. Knowledge is always a positive. Disinformation, what do you mean, lies? That's also a form of knowledge, though. A lie is a false knowledge. There's no such thing as unknowledge, ignorance, I suppose, right? That would maybe be the opposite of this plus, but that's not what the negative is on the page. For today, knowledge is a plus. We got a riddle of how knowledge, wisdom, and discipline will expand the way you know, so you'll be wise and disciplined as well as knowing. And that, this is Jesus' promise to you. as well as what it means to be a disciple and set apart, to be disciples, giving for the sake of the kingdom of God and the reformation of the Catholic Church. Welcome to Set Apart. Yay and hallelujah. Let's do some Samuel. 1 Samuel chapter 13 is where we're going to start so that we kind of get the big picture, the knowledge of the whole story of Saul's rash vow, Saul's blasphemy. Is it his worship of Molech? Not officially. But you're going to see he's just such a fool. Why do you grieve for Saul? God will ask Samuel after God says, I'm done with the guy. Why do you grieve for Saul? That question has always struck me because I kind of do. I'm kind of like, why, Saul? Why? Why? Like every time I read it, I'm just, oh, come on, Saul, why? And so when God says to Samuel, why are you grieving for Saul? I've taken it very seriously. I'm asking the wrong question. If I'm asking Saul why, I'm going to get a stupid answer. I need to ask God why, and the answer is that Saul is a fool. So before you have the Proverbs telling you what a fool is or what a wise man is, you can just get it by reading 1 Samuel and seeing David is very wise and Saul is a damned fool. It would really seem, actually, in the end. In fact, right? I don't want to pronounce the final judgment, but it's pretty clear. He's a damned fool. And so you can trace, I think, his words throughout the book, his story, his narrative, as a good picture of what not to do, as the antagonist in David's protagonist story about what to do. And then underneath all of this, you get the subplot character of Jonathan who comes in. And Jonathan, Saul's son, is he's just such a fascinating guy. Because Saul's a terrible king. But you know who would have been a great king? His son, Jonathan. Obviously, all that needed to happen was for Saul to die and for Jonathan to be king and everything would be resolved. But that's not what God does. God has Saul die and a different man, David, become king. And he tells everybody this 15 years before it happens. And Jonathan's perfectly okay with it, which is really something to study. How did he get to that point of view? But before we get there, let's wrestle with this really tough idea. It's called corporate sin, okay? Corporate sin. I was stunned recently when someone who I respect very much disagreed with me on the fact that corporate sin exists as part of congregational life. I brought it up because it's one of the reasons for closed communion. The reason the pastor doesn't let anyone commune is because if someone who's actually a witch and a blasphemer and hates God comes in and communes here and does so regularly, it will affect us. It will change us. And part of that will be God's wrath on us for not doing something about it. Yeah? And so closed communion is very much about avoiding public sin of other people being poured out on you. Because that's what God does. He visits the sins of the fathers to the third and fourth generation. Jonathan doesn't get to be king, not because of anything Jonathan did wrong ever, but because he was just born to the wrong guy. And God's punishment on his father became his punishment unto death. Now that's the God we have, who's the God of love and grace. And if we're going to understand his love and grace, then we've got to get it. Corporate punishment's a real thing. It's not always fair how sin plays out so far as you feel about it. It's not fair that the whole city was destroyed just because those guys over there were doing evil. I know that I could have left, but I didn't, and now I'm dead. Well, okay. It's the way it is. Maybe you can't avoid it at all. Again, think about it this way, right? It's happened more than once in history. If you lived in Nagasaki or Hiroshima and were a Christian, you died in World War II because the U.S. killed you to stop the war. Was that your fault? Well, you were part of Japan. Japan was doing some crazy evil stuff at the time, really. Butchering people, at war. So, the job is not to say, how can God, or that's not fair. It's just to recognize that in the curse, we're in the kind of open stream of all of it. And so if it happens to fall upon you, that the sins of another come upon you, believe what God has promised otherwise to you, which is that you have yet more grace coming. You have greater blessings coming. Jonathan knows what his future is, and it's beside David. near a throne that Jesus will reign on, in fact, for the rest of eternity, whereas friends, they will remember each other. Jonathan knows that. And so even though he's watching his father have the kingdom stripped from him, can you imagine having a government that is just destroying itself and you have to watch? Yeah, I said that. Yeah, I mean, they have to watch it and wait for God to answer their prayers. And again, it will all happen. So seeking that wisdom in this story now, let's dig into the story and set it up. We're going to go past chapter 12. You can kind of look at the heading, though. Samuel's address at Saul's coronation. Saul is made king in glory and fanfare. He has already shown himself to be a coward, but nonetheless, he's going to stand a head above, and he will go and fight and save Jabesh-Gilead, who later will take his headless body down from the Philistine wall, the men of Jabesh-Gilead, in remembrance of him as a good king. You know, David will sing a song of his greatness as a king. So there's some good here in Saul early, but again, he will prove himself a fool. And we see this quickly in chapter 13 with his unlawful sacrifice. He's already made mistakes. He's already said stupid things. He's already rejected Samuel's advice. But at this point, he decides he's just going to go ahead and play priest, which you're not supposed to do. Like one of the best kings there ever was. I'm going to lose his name, but he becomes a leper because he decides he can be a priest. Like he did everything else right. One day he's like, I'm going to make a sacrifice to leprosy. Rest of his life. Never gets it off till he dies. We'll see him in heaven too. So Saul decides, I'm going to be a priest, and Samuel's like, you shouldn't have done that, and Saul's like, it's your fault. That's the short. Right? That moment, when Saul says, it's your fault, God says, I'm done with that guy. Done. He'll say it to Samuel. This will cause that whole grieving for Saul moment. But then the story goes on, and he's not done like right away. There's quite a bit he'll do through Saul to teach us today, and for David's sake. For David would not have been who he was without Saul, nor would his prayers have been the inspired psalms that they are without all of this trouble, right? So see how in the midst of your trial, in the midst of your trouble, God has a greater plan. And it's probably not about you. It's about all sorts of other people that are going to benefit from you, with you not even knowing how or why. What God ordains is always good. I'm going to tangent because it's just such a great memory. On Vicarage, we had a Wednesday morning Bible study attended by like 9 little old ladies and like 2 kind of old ladies, but mostly like really little old ladies. And there's a little old lady named Frida. And Frida, I think, was in her 90s then. Frida's got to be in heaven by now. And Frida didn't say much to me. Frida could barely lift her head to look at me. She came out of church every week. But she'd say, keep on keeping on. You know, keep on keeping on. I loved it. Keep it on too, Frida. She lived in a retirement facility that in the middle of the year burned down. She got out. They all got out. It was fine. It was in the middle of the night on a Tuesday, like 2 a.m., and she came to Bible study that morning, Wednesday. And every week, the pastor would say, what hymn do y'all want to sing? And she piped right up. She said, what God ordains is always good. She never spoke, but she said it. What God ordains is always good. We sang it that day. Her house, her life just burned down. And what did she want? She knew where to go for the good food, right? What God ordains is always good. He has a better plan. He knows what he's doing. All right, so let's start at chapter 13, verse 16, where it says, Saul, Jonathan, his son, and the people present with him remained in Gibeah of Benjamin. That's going to be like near Saul's headquarters. The Philistines encamped at Michmash. This is across a valley and up a kind of a challenging ravine. It'll talk about that here in a moment. Then raiders came out of the camp of the Philistines in 3 companies. One company turned onto the road to Orpha, to the land of Shual. Another company turned on the road to Beth-orin. Again, where they're going, not as important for our point today. Verse 19, now there was no blacksmith to be found throughout all the land of Israel. For the Philistine says, lest the Hebrews make swords or spears. So Second Amendment rights, and government's taking away Second Amendment rights. It's an old hat too, right? And so if you can't forge anything in iron, you can't hurt anybody. You might remember at some point Gideon has to thresh in a corner because of this very same kind of thing. In any case, what it means is, and it's going to get down to end of verse 22, it came about on the day of the battle. There's a fight, or a big fight. You got a war. That there was neither sword nor spear found in the hand of any of the people who were with Saul and Jonathan, but they were found with Saul and Jonathan, his son. And the garrison of the Philistines went out to the pass of Michmash. So you have this scenario where Saul's been called to fight for God against this great enemy, and he's been doing it and winning, and he calls out the people to come and fight on a day when it's really going to matter, and they're going to take it all home. I mean, Goliath isn't quite there yet, but like they're setting up for that day, right? And no one's got a sword. You got what, pitchforks? They didn't have those, shepherd's crooks. You got shepherd's crooks. How are you going to win that fight? Well, Saul's going to sit on his butt. So what are you going to do? He's not going to go anywhere. He's going to sit and wait. And that's why what happens next is where Jonathan shows himself to be someone who understands the promises Saul has received. Really, all the people. Chapter 14 says, "It happened one day that Jonathan, the son of Saul, said to the young man who bore his armor, 'Come, let us go over to the Philistine garrison that is on the other side.' But he did not tell his father. And Saul was sitting in the outskirts of Gibeah under a pomegranate tree, which is in Migron." Saul likes to sit under trees. The people who were with him were about 600 men. No swords, though, right? Ahijah, the son of Ahitub, Ichabod's brother. Remember all of that from Eli's house and Ithamar's house, all that stuff. Ahijah, the son of Phinehas, the son of Eli, the Lord's priest in Shiloh, was wearing an ephod. So he's got the high priest with him. But the people did not know that Jonathan had gone. So they're off on their stronghold doing their thing. The Philistines are on their stronghold doing their thing. There's a ravine between them. They're not ready to fight yet. And no one knows. Jonathan's to his buddy, like his 17-year-old armor bearer. "Hey, let's go. Let's see." Quite a thing. There's more that he's going to say in a moment about what he expects. So between the passes by which Jonathan sought to go over to the Philistines, there was a sharp rock on one side and a sharp rock on the other. And the name of the one was Bozez, and the name of the other was Seneh. Those two words, there's Seneh means thorns, and Bozez can mean one of two things. And one's like shining. So some scholars suggest it was like a crystal rock, like a shiny rock, and that's why they called it that. But nobody has ever found these rocks. They are undiscovered archaeology. So they're two really big rocks, and one's named Thorns, and the other one's named either Shining or Craggy, raw, rocky, painful. So what it means is no one goes this way. No one goes this way. It's too hard. Right? That's where they're going. The front of one faced northward opposite Michmash, the other toward Gibeah. I don't know, could you find these today? I don't know. Jonathan said to the young man who bore his armor, here's where "Let us go over to the garrison of these uncircumcised fellows, yeah? It may be that Jesus will work for us, for nothing restrains Jesus from saving by many or by few." I mean, the kid's kind of brilliant. You're not supposed to test God, right? But is he good? "Let us see whether or not we shall be victorious." That's not what he said. Is not God always going to come and fight for us so we win? That's not what he said. He said, aren't we always going to get saved from our problems? Isn't that the promise we've been given? And in fact, again, if you go look at the book of Leviticus, in the promises given to the people, it's very clear that 2 or 3 will rout 1,000. It promises that. And so Jonathan is like, okay, my dad is going to sit over there and do whatever. I'm not going to sit still and not believe the way he doesn't believe. I'm going to act on the faith that I have. I'm going to go do what's in my hands to do, and I'm going to let Jesus send the answers. And what happens is a rout. In fact, God will fight for them. So there's a bit of back and forth about how they're going to go up the hill, and I don't want to get into the kind of who calls to what, but you can just assume that the ones on top, the Philistines, think, look at these guys. If you come up here, I'll kill you. Come on, can you make it? And next thing you know, he's on them with a sword, and they're dying. He kills like 20. Let's see if we can get down to that point. Oh, goodness. I'm going to lose the text then. There it is. Verse 13. Jonathan climbed up on his hands and knees with his armor bearer after him, and they fell before Jonathan. What does that mean? And that's where we can spend a lot of time trying to figure it out. He won, is what it means. Right? As he came after him, his armor bearer killed them. So Jonathan's striking them, they're getting wounded, his armor bearer's coming through and just finishing the deed with, I don't know whose sword he borrowed. That first slaughter, which Jonathan and his armor bearer made, was about 20 men within about half an acre of land. Right? So it's like an outpost. It's like a watch station for their garrison. And the cause of this somehow causes, verse 15, trembling in the camp, in the field, and among the people. So there's shouting to be heard from the hill outlook, and somebody's running toward you with a bleeding face. And so you go, oh my goodness, there's murder! And then everybody starts to get nervous, and the whole camp's in an uproar before you know what's going on. Of course, God is behind this. The earth quaked, it says, so that it was a very great trembling, right? So in the midst of we're being attacked, now there's an earthquake. Right? Can you plan these things? Back then you couldn't. God can. Now the watchmen of Saul in Gibeah of Benjamin looked, and there was the multitude melting away, and they went here and there. So he's noticing that there's a change in the dynamic of the other army. He asked the question, call roll. They find out Jonathan's not there. I'm in verse 17, now 18. He says, bring the ark. This is good. Saul does something right. He says, let me ask God what I should do. Bring the ark. That time they had the ark. Verse 19, while Saul talked to the priest, the noise which was in the camp of the Philistines continued to increase. So Saul should be leading this fight, right? He's still trying to ask God what to do. That is good. So Saul says to the priest, withdraw your hand. Then Saul and all the people who were with him, verse 20, assembled and went to the battle. And indeed, every man's sword was against his neighbor, and there was a very great confusion, right? So you're coming in with your pitchforks and stabs, and you're discovering that the Philistines who are, fans of Baal are fighting with the Philistines who are fans of, Neptune or whatever. Not really Neptune, but, they're killing each other, which means there's swords on the ground, which means you can pick one up, and while they're killing each other, you can stab that guy in the back, and you cut off that guy's head, and wow, it's a rout, is what that's called. And in the ancient world, if you're going to fight for your life and your city, this is what you want, right? You want your boys to come home, right? And you want their boys not to. It's the only way it works. Moreover, verse 21, the Hebrews who were with the Philistines before that time, who went up with them into the camp, they also joined the Israelites who were with Saul and Jonathan. Likewise, all the men of Israel who had hidden in the mountains of Ephraim, when they heard the Philistines fled, they also followed hard in battle. So Jesus saved Israel that day. And the battle shifted to Beth Aven. And then we get to our text that we heard read, where we find out that even though this is great and a victory and God is fighting for them and Jonathan's prayer for salvation is being answered, nonetheless, his father is such a doof, that after withdrawing his hand from asking God what to do, which he could have finished it, but he got the battle, that's fine. He then decides to declare his own glory to the suffering of his people. Just see how this is like the worst thing a king can say. Cursed is the man who eats any food until evening before I have taken vengeance on my enemies, as if that's what's going on. And then cursed be the man. Oops, King Saul, did you forget that there's a covenant involved? And that you're the king under the covenant? And so when you talk, it's the law. And when you curse in God's name, it's like going to count. And so you better follow through on this vow you just made. And that goes for everybody, not just the king. But you're the king. Doof. What a doof. And it's going to come back and hurt, right? The people don't taste food. Jonathan's going to say later they could have had a greater victory. They just ate the food. Although they come to this forest, there's honey on the ground. Did you remember in that Leviticus text? He mentioned it as many times in Exodus as well. I'm bringing you to a land flowing with milk and honey. And here it is. The honey is just flowing. We've found all those properties by now, and there's a tax on them, trust me. But at this point, right, they walk in, and there it is, flowing. And when they come into the woods, it's dripping. But no one will put his hand to his mouth, for they fear the oath. They know that he's sworn as the king of God that he has to kill whoever would eat. So they're not gonna. And there's the honey. They leave it. But Jonathan, his son, doesn't know. His ignorance, he stretches out his rod, eats it. It says his countenance brightened. Hear this as, like, you know how when you haven't had food and you have a little food, like you go from hangry to a little better. Yeah, here we go. That's what that means, that his face just was livened with energy. And then the people tell him about this curse that's given. And he says, my father has troubled the land. He sees right away the role of the king. Again, why is Jonathan not king? Because of corporate sin, because it's real. We can't get away from it. It's not a bias. It's not God being arbitrary. In fact, if your house rejects God, it falls on you. You can repent, but you won't get everything your house had before. That's the way it's going to be. It's just kind of it, right? And so again, if your country rejects God, it's going to fall on you. Doesn't mean your neighbor has to reject God or your city has to reject God, but just know that the corporate punishment is there. And then, as a faithful man, Jonathan, take it, standing up. Go, right? See if God will not save you yet. For he loves us all. So he says the land's being cursed by my father. And again, think about it. He knows this too. So if his father kills him, this is as good as offering him up to Molech, which is to bring a curse on the land, in fact and in truth. Murdering your children in the name of vows to God is what Molech would have you do. It's not who God is. It's not who Jesus is. So he can even see this now, I think. And again, he talks about how it would have been better if they'd eaten the honey, a greater day, and see the masculine understanding of war, a greater slaughter, meaning a greater peace afterwards. So from there, we didn't hear read. They had driven, verse 31, the Philistines that day from Michmash to Aijalon. So the people were faint. And there's this whole other event that takes place. They go to the food once they can finally eat. They're so hungry that they go and they start killing the animals and eating them without draining the blood, which is ritually unclean because it's actually unhealthy as well. And so in both senses, they come to Saul and they're like, uh-oh, we're going to all die now eating bad food. They're going to get sick, the whole army. And so he's like, bring a big stone, and they get it cut the right way. They make the clean offerings. That part gets fixed by Saul. But then coming down to verse 36, right? Then Saul says, let us go down after the Philistines by night and plunder them until the morning light, and let us not leave a man of them. Big man when you're winning, Saul. Big man when you're winning. Yeah, it's not a bad plan if you're winning. That's what you're supposed to do is rout your enemies. And he does the right thing here too. He'll listen. They say, do whatever seems good. The priest says, you still haven't asked God, right? Let us draw near to God here. The Ark of the Covenant involves the lights and the glories where they can actually ask direct questions to God and get direct answers by a shining, beautiful, revelation tied to the priest himself and his outfit and the ark. They can do this whenever they want. Saul won't do it very often. Won't really do it, it would seem, almost. And he gets a pretty bad answer here in a moment. David will do it right away. He'll do it right away. Saul asked counsel of God, shall I go down after the Philistines? Will you deliver them into the hand of Israel? That's verse 37. But God, did not answer him that day. Ooh, that's cold right there. That's cold. Saul says, come over here, all you chiefs. He's kind of smart. It's what the pagans do. Remember when Jonah's on the ship and the ship's going to go down because of Jonah, and they're like, let's cast lots, see if God knows. Oh, look, it's you. Right? Saul's going to do the same thing. I'm not suggesting casting lots always works that way. However, in the Bible it seems to, so trust your pips. I don't know what to say. Don't bet on them. I would say that, The lots that God gives you to cast in this world are not for profiting by accidental money gain, right? So if you're going to read the randomness of any casting of lots, let's say you're going to call a new pastor and you have a list of 5 and you assign them all a number and you draw the ball, and whichever ball you get, that's who you call. Many Lutheran congregations have done that in history. That's casting lots. It's perfectly okay. So there's a difference between, snake eyes on the street and this. This is asking God in prayer for his answer. And again, it's a cold answer. There's no answer. So Saul goes to the pips, the lots, in order to see if God will answer there. And he declares this idea of the perfect lot. we won't get into too much, but you can imagine the story very easily. By the end of all the die casting, you got Saul and Jonathan left and everybody else on the other side. So God's mad at one of us. And you got to know, who's Saul? Where does Saul go? Who's Saul going to assume God's mad at usually? Himself, actually. That's why he doesn't trust God. He doesn't believe in God. He thinks God's awful. And so now it's him and his son. He's going, oh my goodness, who's God mad at? Well, cast between us, and then the rage that he feels at himself, guess what it falls on next? Jonathan, right? Let's get to that point here. Verse 42, Saul said, cast lots between my son Jonathan and me. So Jonathan was taken, and Saul said to Jonathan, tell me what you have done. And Jonathan told him and said, I only tasted a little honey with the end of the rod that was in my hand, so now I must die. Exclamation point? I don't know. That's not there in the Hebrew. It's certainly him saying, go ahead, Dad. Go ahead, Dad. Right? I'm not running. Jonathan's so amazing. Talk about it. Joseph and Jonathan. Find me anyone like them before Jesus. Daniel. They're so rare, these guys. Love them for who they are. Love them for who they are. The people said to Saul, though, right? Saul says, God do so and more, for you shall surely die. So he doubles down on his vow. You see this? It wasn't like, oops, I'm wrong. I'll take the heat, God chasing me, which he could have done. It's, in God's name, I will surely kill you, which is, again, to not see he's worshiping Molech without realizing it. Right? You shall surely die. And then the people intervene. Verse 45, because they love Jonathan. They say to Saul, shall Jonathan die, who has accomplished this? The whole thing starts with him asking for salvation, right? Let's see if Jesus will save me today. And now it's my father who's going to kill me. What a day that was. Yeah. Shall this happen? The people won't let it happen. Certainly not. As Jesus lives, not a hair of his head shall fall to the ground. He has worked with God this day. So the people rescued Jonathan. He did not die. And hurrah and hooray. Remember that in Leviticus, we heard it read this morning, if you don't stone the man who worships Molech by offering his son in the fire, then God will do it himself. And we watch this happen to Saul as his family, including Jonathan, is destroyed, precisely according to his vow. His rash tongue didn't think before he spoke. It goes on. He will continue to have some victories. It mentions his continuing wars. But in chapter 15, we have like the final folly. Before he just kind of turned to David from that point. It's just, Saul's just really done. He's insane. And this final folly is when he will spare Agag, king of the Amalekites. The Amalekites are one of the people of the Old Testament you should know. You should try to kind of familiarize yourself with these guys, right? I'm going to give you a couple here. The Amalekites, the Midianites, the Edomites, the Moabites, the Ammonites. They're all right in a little crescent row around the outside of Israel as different people groups, and they're all fascinatingly wicked in different ways and at different times. Sometimes the Midianites are friends. Edom is Esau. He's not always bad, but golly, remember against the sons of Edom that day of Jerusalem. That's what Psalm 137 says. So these are the enemies of Israel, and the Amalekites, the one mentioned here, will be the least familiar to you. You probably will be more familiar with the Moabites, right? Ruth was a Moabite. Or the Ammonites. There's always a problem with the Ammonites going on somewhere. But the Amalekites, they are the ones that do a couple things. In the Exodus story, after the crossing of the Red Sea, when Israel is just kind of moving along on their own, they come out of their lands and attack Israel and try to take their stuff. Because that's who they are. So if you want to imagine Genghis Khan on camels, it's pretty close. Genghis Khan's people on camels, raiding Mongols on camels. That's the Amalekites. They harry the Israelites out of the south. And again, now at this point, with the kingdom theirs and the land being taken, God is going to say something to Saul about these Amalekites. And we're going to read this part. Notice this too, though. As you see the word Amalekite, notice that the name Molech is right in the middle of it. They are the worshipers of Molech officially. And then that word Molech is built on the word king and the word shame squished together, which means that Molech is not their word for it. They would have called him Melek, the king. They worshipped the king is what they did, whoever that was, and they burned their kids to do it, right? Dead king, live king, I don't know. But Molech, king of shame, the Israelites say, and here God will say, go punish them. In fact, not even that. God will say, I'm so tired of them killing babies and thinking it's worship, I want you to kill all of them, including their babies. Here it is. The word of Jesus came to Samuel, saying, I greatly regret that I have set up Saul as king, for he has turned back from following me, has not performed my commands. And it grieved Samuel, and he cried out to the Lord all night. So when Samuel rose early in the morning to meet Saul, it was told Samuel, saying, Saul went to Carmel. And indeed, he set up a monument for himself. Big man when you're on top, Saul. Big man when you're on top. And he had gone on around, passed by, and gone down to Gilgal. Then Samuel went to Saul, so he has to catch up to him, and said to him, Blessed are you of Jesus. Saul says this. Blessed are you of Jesus. I have performed. That's why I'm confused. Forgive me, everybody. Will you please jump back to 15 verse 1? I shouldn't have gone to 10. That's why I got confused there. We want to get the actual story first. This is the follow-up to that story. So we got time. So before he sets up a monument to himself, okay, Samuel says to Saul, 15 verse 1, Jesus sent me to anoint you king over his people Israel. Now, therefore, heed the voice of the words of Jesus. Right? It's his last chance to do his job. Thus says Jesus of hosts. Always hear Lord of hosts as God of war, because that's what it means. It means he has so many armies, nobody can stand against him. Right? Not God of war like Mars. Mars should be afraid of Jesus. Right? So Jesus, God of war, he says this, I will punish Amalek, that is, this king, for what he did to Israel, how he ambushed him on the way when he came up from Egypt. Now go and attack Amalek and utterly destroy all that they have, and do not spare them, but kill both man and woman, infant and nursing child, ox and sheep, camel and donkey. That in Levitical or Torah terms is called devoted by fire. And it means that God in the covenant considers their words, the Amalekites, their language, their practices so evil that you can't get any good out of them anymore. And he doesn't want anybody to even study what they did, because all it can do is bring back worse stuff. And so he wants it gone. He did that once with the flood to the whole planet. He swore not to do it again with the flood to the whole planet, but he does do it from time to time to people by punishing them by their enemies. Now, this is pretty important, so I do ask you to pay attention. This is not for us to believe it is ours to punish our enemies the way that Saul does. That is, knowing that, for example, Islam is a devilish religion. That does not mean that God has said to Christianity, take the sword and destroy Islam and leave none remaining. That is not what's been said to us. And anyone who would draw that wisdom from this text is uttering great folly. It is important to know that is what Islam says of you. It is enslave you or kill you. That is what they say of you. It is not our religion, though. Our religion is to fight a different warfare, and it is Jonathan's warfare. So let's use Islam as an example again, and let's imagine that you are surrounded by Muslims and live in a Muslim country, and they've made Christianity illegal. You know what your sword and your shield is? The Psalms. The Psalms, that they won't let you pray out loud on a street corner because they'll make it illegal. So you'll have to do it at home by yourself, and that's what I'm preparing you for. It doesn't matter who you're against so far as I'm concerned. What matters is that you know where the antidote is. You know what your sword is. And your sword most definitely is to call upon Jesus and know that he will save you. Okay, so God is saving Israel by removing the people of Amalek and their gross witchcraft and demon worshiping practices from among them with a military battle that he instigates. Expect such wicked people will be destroyed militarily in the present age, in seasons, without us ever having to do anything about it. Do know that God punishes them just like this. We just aren't the ones sent to do it. It'll be another one like them. He who makes the plunder, he becomes the plunder. Okay, so they're sent. Saul gathered the people, verse 4. 200,000, they're swelling in numbers. The plunder draws more men. 10,000 men of Judah. Wow, so 200,000 foot soldiers, 10,000 men of Judah. They had 600 guys a little while ago. Victory's catching, is it not? Saul came to a city of Amalek and lay in wait in the valley. This will be down south and in the desert. Then Saul said to the Kenites, this is a group that lives down there. There's a history, get out of there lest I destroy you. Was he supposed to say that? I don't know. But the Kenites depart. Verse 7, Saul attacked the Amalekites from Havilah all the way to Shur, which is east of Egypt. It's a long way. He also took Agag, king of the Amalekites, alive, and utterly destroyed all the people with the edge of the sword. But Saul and the people spared Agag and the best of the sheep, the oxen, the fatlings, the lambs, and all that was good, and were unwilling to utterly destroy them. But everything despised and worthless that they utterly destroyed. So they're sent to devote everything by fire for the sake of purging the demon worship in the area, and Saul decides to keep alive like the chief witch, the witch king, and all the good stuff. And then, God says to Samuel, verse 10, I'm sorry I made Saul king. It grieved Samuel all night. He gets up, he finds out Saul is going on and builds a monument to himself, right? Again, big man when you're on top, Saul. Samuel went to Saul, and Saul says, blessed are you. Yay, we're all blessed. God loves us. Victory, victory. I have performed the commandment of the Lord. He's so sure of himself. Samuel says, what is this bleating of sheep in my ears? The lowing of oxen that I hear. Now, and everything you need to know about Saul is in his next answer. Oh, they brought them from the Amalekites, for the people spared the best of the sheep and the oxen to sacrifice to Jesus. It's all for Jesus, we swear. It's for God. Do you know, getting a cookie for you? No. It is, he's ever able to turn it back on whoever came at him and say how it's not his fault. And the lesson to learn is all along, like his son's willing to take the blame and he's blessed. It's not even his fault. He takes the blame and he's blessed. Saul won't take any blame and he's cursed. So what's the lesson? Don't be afraid of a little blame, even if it's not yours. Jesus is your Savior. Yeah. Samuel says, be quiet to Saul, right? I'll tell you what God says, speak on. You were little in your own eyes. Were you not the head of tribes of, When you were little in your own eyes, were you not the head of the tribes of Israel? And did not the Lord anoint you king over Israel? Now the Lord sent you on a mission and said, go do this, right? Kill the Amalekites. Why did you swoop down on the spoil? Why did you do evil in the sight of the Lord? Saul will complain. I've obeyed the voice of the Lord. I've gone on a mission which he sent me and brought back King Agag. Like he didn't even listen. He didn't even listen. I have utterly destroyed the Amalekites. The people took the plunder. It's their fault. I'm the king, but it's their fault. That sounds familiar too these days. Goodness, Jesus, help us. Saul said to Samuel in verse 24, I have sinned. I have transgressed the commandment of Jesus and your words because I feared the people and obeyed their voice. Therefore, please pardon my sin and return with me that I may worship Jesus. Oh, such a hard thing. Why is it wrong? Because he doesn't say, I'm sorry, Jesus. He says, Samuel, I know you're in with Jesus. Help me out here. I get this from people all the time, by the way. They find out I'm a pastor and they're like, oh, pray for me. I'm like, well, why don't you pray? Oh, I do, but you pray for me. I will, but do you think I'm closer or something? Like, can I kind of like put a coin in his pocket and make him answer this time? No. And that's Saul's error here with Samuel. It's like, oh, you can turn this around. I lost the kingdom, maybe not yet. Maybe I can keep the kingdom. And he'll keep trying to keep the kingdom till he dies, almost killing himself and failing at that too. What a sad story. The rashness of King Saul, the blindness of King Saul, the folly of King Saul. He does not believe in God. It's that simple. His folly is that he doesn't think God's really there. The wisdom of his son, which is salvation, is to know that God is there and plans to save you because you're his. And while that promise does not go for everybody in the world just because, it does go for everybody who's baptized. That's a lot of people now, including you. So the promise that Jonathan trusted in, that 2 or 3 may put to rout 1,000, is still ours. I'm not suggesting to you that if you don't like the way votes go, 2 or 3 of you go with your ARs and try to take on the White House, you will die. If several thousand of you try to take on the White House, you will die. I'm not suggesting any of those such things. I'm suggesting that God hears your prayers, and if you just sit back, do the right thing, trust in Jesus, study his word, and ask him to put another in the office. Every office and any office. He eventually will. The wicked will destroy themselves, tear down their houses, and he will build you up. And that he will build you up is the good news of Jesus Christ. In Jesus' name, amen.